Yeah, Ben, first of all, thanks very much for taking the time for Radio Jack. It's a real honor to have you today, even though it's a little tricky with the time zone difference, but
Yeah.
that makes it even more important for having you in the show. So thanks
Yeah,
very
sure.
much for that.
I appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm glad to be here, to be honest. I always enjoy doing interviews. I think that when people get a chance to really like see what goes on, like what goes into the music, I think it's very important because music is extremely important. So yeah, I appreciate being here.
Yeah, thanks very much. So really a pleasure. So now for you, it has been, Ludovico Technique is now on the go since roundaboutish 2012. So 12, you
Yeah.
also released your first album. Some things are beyond therapy. So it went then further, and directly a year later, you released a second album with loads of collaborations. We came back to Wreck Everything, and then there was Quiet. I think you were a lot on tour these days then, right? So doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's correct.
Exactly.
So yeah, so we began then, just like you said, and I'm not the type of musician who can tour and like write an album in the back of the tour van, the tour bus or something. Like there's a lot of guys that can write an entire album while they're out on the road. I unfortunately at that time really was not someone that could do that just because maybe you are more familiar with the concept of like a writer kind of going out into the woods in a cabin in a snowy winter and like writing a novel like by themselves, in isolation. That's kind of more, even though it's not a novel, it's music. That's sort of more my writing style is to have quiet and solitude around me and reflect upon my experiences and kind of gather them and write them that way. And if you're trying to write new material while on the road, I mean, it's completely the opposite than that, right? So, right. So what had happened was release the first album, then release an album filled with a bunch of collaborations, as you said, toured extensively. So just
Mhm.
went basically just started touring and touring and touring. Then a few years later, I'm like, wait a second. Yeah, exactly. I was like, I have to write some new material, I think. So I did the Absence single
Mhm.
in like either 2017 or 18 or whatever. And that was really kind of like a turning point, I think, for Ludovico Technique because that opened up an entire new world of like just I don't know what it was about that song. That's a lot of people's favorite song. I think it just really struck a chord with a lot of people. And that song is about depression, right? So I'm giving into the absence that has become my life and all that. I mean, it's obviously about depression and kind of it's a song about letting depression win, which, I think that the most constructive way to explore feelings of that nature is in stuff like art and not in real life. In real life, you can't let depression win because we know where that leads. But in art is where you can explore those ideas, and I think it's a lot more constructive to do it in art like that. So I think that's why it really resonates with a lot of people because it's something that when you say I'm giving into the depression, or in this case, I renamed depression absence. I'm giving into the absence. I think a lot of people, they're like, wow, that really speaks to me. And so anyway, so there's that. So if you want to continue,
Okay, yeah, but Absence was also from a musical perspective a little bit of a changer. So going from primarily most of it or almost all pure electric, into the, more the rocky areas then, which also then follows up with Haunted in 2022 then.
yeah,
So before Haunted, you released numerous singles and then, put it all together into the album Haunted, which was then in the end featured in many magazines, went onto playlists, being it Orcas, Notfest, whatsoever. And yeah,
yeah,
now you're having over 2 million streams on Spotify. So with the
yeah.
whole story going on. So that's really great achievements in the last years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like, so 2017 was when we started implementing different, like guitars and stuff into the music. So Absence is the first track that has guitars in it. And then from then on, I kind of, so Haunted People, like you mentioned from 2022, it has guitars in different varying capacities. So I know that a lot of, industrial fans, they don't like love guitars, but I always thought that there would, if there was a place, see, the way that I write is like, just like even in my voice. So there's some songs like Burn Everything where I'm screaming, and then there's other songs like Haunted where it's like I'm just singing in my baritone voice, and then sometimes I'll sing in a higher register, and or there's a song like Silence, which is a vocoder, and it's like a robot the entire time, right? The way I choose those things, and whether or not I choose to put guitars like front and center, or I choose to kind of have them off in the little bit more like secondary or whatever, is really to serve the song. Like when you are trying to express something, and any musician, the reason they even do music is because they're either trying to just either express an emotion, maybe if they're not even a lyricist, but they're just a performer, it could just be pure emotion, like they love performing, they love playing drums, they love playing guitar, they love playing whatever, keyboard. And then if you're a lyricist and you write lyrics, then there's the added dimension of, okay, well, let me put some words to these feelings, and then we could have even an extra dimension. So when it comes to guitars, that's like this extra, it's another tool in the arsenal to pick from to color the, like let's say I use these analogies between the different art forms. So let's say you're a painter and you have all these different colors. Well, guitar or singing like singing aggressively or singing, let's say, like clearly, these are all sort of different ways to color what you're trying to say. So there's some times where there's only, if you need to paint something and it needs to be red, that could be the equivalent of, this has to be an angry song, this has to be me screaming, there's no other way to convey this exact emotion I'm trying to convey, it's going to be screaming, it's going to be aggressive, it's going to be red. Other times you might say, hey, I'm trying to convey a little bit of a different thing here, so you might not pick that, you might pick something different. I think that there's music, as we all know, without music, life would be, so much more empty and darker. And I think music really brings an extra element to existence that I would never want to be without, right? And so creating music, I create it from a fan standpoint where I'm a fan of music in general. So I write things I want to hear, so if there's something that I feel inside that I want to say, I'll write it in a way that I would want to hear it, obviously. So there's that.
That's great. But, in the end, you have to be, the one who loves your own music. That's like totally normal way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
But and how's then your inspiration going on? So when you're like writing songs, so is it like that you talked about it's a lot of emotional things, etc. But then, so is it more the lyrics? Is it more the music, more the atmosphere that you're then building up, or with what are you starting off then?
Right. That's a very good question. I think that's, a lot of people do wonder about that. And so sometimes, like, a song might begin as a melody that I have in my head. So let's say, I don't know, Embrace, right? My hands locked around you in a loving embrace. Like, lyrically, I kind of just had that melody of that chorus. There was no other music yet. So it was like just that. My hands locked around you. You know, like, and I thought, okay, and I started to build a song around that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but whereas that one might have been that way, a song like Silence from Haunted People,
Mm-hmm.
that began without the lyrics at first, and that began more as a drum beat and sort of that guitar, that synthesizer that kind of comes in, like, so each song, it's almost like, here's an analogy. I missed your analogy, right? If you'll have to forgive me, any purists
Perfect.
out there that are like, oh, what's this guy doing?
Perfect.
You know, it's kind of like when you cook different dishes. So
Mm-hmm.
if you make a sandwich, you start with the bread, blah, blah, blah. If you're making, let's say, a casserole, it's not that way. It's a different way, but it's still food. So I guess that the way that you create different songs, whatever emotion you're going for or whatever vibe you're feeling, that's kind of how it begins. So there's no, I think the best that you could do is you could say, hey, here's my favorite song of yours or any artist. How did this one get started? Like, was this one the lyrics first, the melody first, the guitars first, the synthesizer first? You know, because I think that every single one of them is different. And anyone who, I mean, I'll say friends of mine that are musicians, they might have a stringent way of like, I always do this, I always create this synthesizer pattern or something, and then I build on that. That's great. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. So any of your viewers that are also musicians, there's nothing wrong with that. But I would advise that if you truly have things that you want to express deep in the depths of your spirit, um, you know, try some different ways of writing things. Try, you know, you could just experiment around with different ways of beginning songs, and you'll find that you get something completely different. Like, so, like I was saying with Embrace,
Mm-hmm.
the song Embrace, beginning it with vocals, with a vocal melody, ended up being a completely different type of song than had I begun that song with like a synthesizer part.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So there's the long answer, I think, of your question.
Very good, but that's exactly, looking into the inside. So really cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
So now thinking about, I mean, it's like a whole process that you're describing. So now thinking about that in 2021 and 22, so you released numerous singles. So how did you keep the spirit, the motivation? Let's not talk about the times these days, right? So everyone knows these were like crazy times. Everything was
Sure.
like going into the unknown. But how did you keep yourself motivated to really release one new song?
Right. Yeah. It's like it's a pretty strict schedule. It was like it was releasing a new single like every month for the entirety of like 2021 and part of 2022. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you and your viewers, during that time period, I thrived because not your dear viewers, I adore all of them and I adore you, but people having to stay away from them was probably it didn't affect me in any negative way. I enjoyed having to not be I'm a goth at heart, right? So I think those of us who are goth can relate that we're not maybe the biggest fans of people all the time. So
Very true.
so that means that during that time period, I actually I know this is going to sound terrible. And this isn't to make light of anyone that was going through a rough time. So I want to be very clear. Obviously, if you had people that were affected, all of that, you know, I'm not soulless. Obviously, that matters to me. But I'm saying from a purely social standard
Hmm.
of just having to be among people, I was very inspired. My batteries were completely recharged, you know, because a lot of us, when you're around people a lot, it can kind of drain those batteries and make you need what for that time period. I felt invigorated, to be honest. Not because of like, okay, so there's a couple aspects to it. So I do have to kind of the part that would cause a person anxiety, the unknown, like you mentioned, sure, that was not fun. at all. So what's going on here? Like, where is this going? Where is this going to lead? What's going to happen? All those things, sure, would cause a lot of anxiety. But if there's going to be like if you could look at the positives of any of it, I will say that not having to be around a lot of people definitely made me be able to kind of concentrate and focus on the things that I really enjoy doing. And so there you go. That happened. And then I was like laser focused and fully charged, not distracted in any way to get this out, to do that. And it was really rewarding because, you know, I'm an old school kind of, obviously I love albums. I think those of us, a lot of people remember albums. You remember putting on an album that you love and listening to it and thinking, you know, track the song one all the way through and thinking this is great. And so I think I had to realize, like, you know, let's try this out. Let's see how this goes. So it was more sort of the idea that I had a new album but I was in the middle of completing the songs and writing it. And I thought, well, what if I start to just release this once a month? It's called a Waterfall release. Like it is, there are obviously artists that do that, like major label artists and stuff. And there's a whole like campaign way of doing that. And so I thought, let's try this out. Let's see how this goes. If it's an utter failure and everyone hates it, then in my next album, I could just go ahead and put out an album just like usual.
Yeah.
But everyone loved it. I would get messages all the time like, I can't wait for next month. Like, I'm so excited, right? So what I thought might be something that I was unsure about, it turned out that the fans showed me that they were super into it. And at that point, I thought, well, that's great because it keeps people engaged. It keeps people sort of excited. And then another aspect to releasing singles, let's say, and this is what I would suggest for like an artist who has an album coming out. Do what I did. Release a bunch of singles, one a month for a few months, see how long you can go. I think that there's something to be said. Not every single one of those songs that got released would have been typically what would have been released as a single like years ago. And so I think that as an artist, when you write a bunch of songs that really matter to you a lot, very often when you release an album, you know, if it's track 7 or 8 on an album with, you know, 10 or 11 songs, right? A lot of times they might get a little overlooked. And I think that by releasing the singles once a month, there's going to be songs, obviously, that people like better than others. It's a given, sure.
That's the normal taste, right? So
what'd you say?
That's just normal taste, right?
Right, of course.
I mean,
yeah, it's just the nature of subjectivity. Yeah. So I think that what happens is when you release your songs once a month over a period of time like that, every single thing that matters to you, every one of your creations, every one of your emotional expressions, your artistic creation, your artistic expressions, gets at least its moment in the sun to be sort of center of attention. And even if people don't like that one maybe as much as another one that you release, you'll know that at least it had its chance to connect with whoever it was going to connect with, you know? And so it's a given that people might not like one, you know, there's people that are like, oh, I like the one that came out in July more than the one that came out in May or whatever, right? Like, sure. But there's nothing worse as an artist of any form of art that when you pour so much heart and soul into something and then it kind of just goes onto a shelf somewhere and it's never, art is meant to be experienced and to have a life of its own. It's almost like you take a part of yourself and you put it out there and that it in itself is somewhat alive. And so I think the tragedy of some great art is it's maybe never experienced by some people. And so, you know, if there's anyone on the fence of the whole releasing singles thing that's watching this, just know that if nothing else, it's a way for art to be, you know, have that level of exposure at least for a moment. And then if people are like, oh, I don't like that particular song that came out this particular month, you know, it'll go back to number 7 or 8 on the album, and maybe they'll skip over it when they buy the full album. So yeah,
That's true, yeah. But as you said, right? So actually, if you do it like that, then each and every song gets the space that they deserve in the end. So I think that's kind of like a pretty cool concept behind that. And as you said, you weren't the only one doing that, right?
sure.
So and what you were saying, so what it's pretty funny. So when because actually your colleague Daniel is primarily said almost the same. So it's pretty
Oh yeah.
interesting.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
great.
how things. So it's really funny, really interesting actually. So
I think that
um,
yeah. So there's something to be said about that. If you know, it's kind of like multiple people have had a similar sentiment. I think
yeah,
that yeah, there's something to be said that it's not just some made up nonsense, you know.
exactly, exactly. So you're also like doing the video stuff on your own.
Yeah.
So pretty DIY-ish. Um, so how come that you're even getting into this? I mean, when you're talking very, picturesque, emotions and stuff. So, I mean, it sounds kind of like the natural step that you're also doing that on your own, that you have it in your hands as well, right? To express then also in an, imagery kind of way, the lyrics, the music, etc. But I mean, how come that you also took over this in the end? Or is it that
Right.
you're originally a videographer or something?
No, I wasn't. I didn't know anything about video. So, you know, from what we were talking about earlier on my career, I knew nothing of video. So the first few videos, I would hire people, you know, much like musicians do, to direct them and film them and everything. So, um, potential wasn't me, and Deeper Into You isn't me. And then it was right around the time of Absence that I still didn't know anything about video at the time, right? And so I wanted Absence because I knew that was quite a special song, and it felt special to me at least. So I wanted it to be really something special video wise. So I hired someone, and you know, I think that I still didn't know much about video at all. I hired someone, and what I was seeing, you know, because when you're in the middle of production, you kind of review what you're filming thus far, like kind of in the middle of it. So we weren't finished yet, but I was seeing what was being filmed, and I wasn't super happy. And that's not to say that I'm like a perfectionist by any means, but like if you have something in your head, you at least want to kind of get close to it. You want to at least get in the zone, right? Like somewhere near what you're trying to convey, because that's the emotion you're trying to convey. Well, anyway, it didn't really work out with that individual. So I took the next few months, like kind of teaching myself how to work cameras and what that was all about.
Yeah.
And with that said, I then filmed like a whole bunch more footage for that video. And so that was pretty much my first video, was Absence. Since then I've done Becoming Numb and Embraced. And interestingly enough, in a few days from now, I'm going to be releasing a video for the song Live As Myself, which I don't know if you know that one on Haunted People, but it's this one's really, the one coming out is really super epic. It's got a lot of drone shots and a lot of aerial kind of video. But anyway, to answer your question, was I a video person prior? Not at all. Did I want to be? You know, I think I took it as a way to have a different, you know how in life sometime you like to have things that are away from what you do, mainly as a little bit of a release or a break or sort of a side hobby that's just for fun. And I thought there was a part of me that's like, hey, maybe I'll get into video and that could be a thing that I do on the side for fun. And here's why. There's a couple of reasons that really does work. When you're doing music, I mean, unless you're a completely independent artist just starting out and you don't really work with, anyone else and you're just doing your thing and whatever, which is, the case for some people. But there comes a point in your career where when you're doing music, you're working with mix engineers, producers, record labels, management, tour management, other band members. And I'm not saying any of this in a bad way. I'm just saying that it sometimes can take on like a very full team like thing, and you're not, it's like a whole group sort of situation. Whereas maybe when you began, you enjoyed that you were doing music, maybe even just alone if you're an electronic musician and you can kind of just write stuff, So at that point in my career, there was a lot of like managers, tour managers, record label stuff, everything I just mentioned. And I thought, well, maybe this video stuff, because when you think about it this way, when you have just a camera in your hand and you just go outside or you're around the city and you're just kind of by yourself, it's kind of solitary. Now, obviously, when major motion pictures is a whole team of hundreds of people, sure, but you can just sort of take a camera and go filming by yourself, taking pictures of trees or buildings or whatever, and that could be like a little bit of a escape, like a little fun thing to do. I thought, see, this is going somewhere, I promise. I thought that could be maybe what I did with filming. It didn't turn into that. What it turned into, of course, was the moment that I started learning more about how to achieve a certain look that I wanted with cameras and stuff. Because there's a lot that goes into it. It's not, people think you could just buy a camera and just point it at something and it looks amazing. I wish. If it were that, I wish. There's like a lot that actually goes into it. You have to learn and you have to know. But of course, what it turned into is that the more I learned about camera stuff and like filming, the more I wanted to incorporate it, of course, into Ludovico Technique and film all the music videos going forward and this and that. And so here we are. Didn't work out as like a relaxing side hobby to do away from music. It kind of just got absorbed into music, but I still have a great deal of passion for camera stuff and doing camera stuff. I think that, there's certain people that can like paint and then also do like poetry, or maybe they're a writer and then they also do cooking, or, and for me, I can't draw at all, like whatsoever. I can't draw, can't really paint. So these were kind of like the arts, visual, like camera work and music that I can do. So yeah.
But that's like a interesting how you came to that and how you then even put it into a proficiency or into a pretty proficient way, putting things together and bringing up the visuals then around that. So
right.
Really interesting. So I mean now we're like, I mean, you had a long time touring before Absence, so then Absence, then also some touring, but then it was like the sort of like the cut came. So, and you also enjoyed the creativity part, as I understood during that time. So when I would ask you now, what do you prefer, playing live or creating music? What would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, because, and the reason it's an interesting question is because I think not only whatever day you ask a touring musician, they might have a completely different answer. Like, what do I like better, playing live or studio work? Because I think on a bad day, it's going to be a different answer. But what I'll say is this. I writing music is like the creative aspect where you're pulling from inside yourself to create something new and that has not been heard before, that you have not even maybe said before. So think of it this way. When you're creating new songs or new anything for any type of artist, when you're creating something new, you're delving into yourself to find something maybe new or maybe even familiar, but something fresh in a way that hasn't been said before, or maybe if it has been said before, something that needs to be said again. That's completely different from performing the material, because then so then when you go, let's say you release that album and you make those songs, and that had an entire emotional sort of expression to it. Then when you go perform the songs, that takes on an entirely different type of emotional expression, because what happens there is you're taking those songs that you took the time to create and you're expressing them through the performance aspect with a group of, you know, a bunch of people that like, and so that in itself, that's like a whole other experience that is also great. It's also like enriching. So as far as like one versus the other, it's like there's so sort of two sides to the same coin that in order to say you didn't like one, you'd be throwing away the entire coin, right? Now, there's plenty of artists that maybe never perform live, but maybe in their heart, they want to. So I'm not trying to say that you have to play live. I haven't played live in a little bit right now because I was, right before that thing that happened that we were talking about, I had actually taken a little bit of a break to go write new songs. And then the thing that we were talking about happened to occur. And that sort of made it that I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to be going out right now. I know a lot of my friends' bands have, to varying degrees of success or, you know, enjoyment, you know. So, but I think that for me, both are amazing. So I gave you a very long answer. I'll give you the short version of it. Performing live, it's so amazing to have that experience with other human beings by presenting the things that mean so much to you in a setting of that nature where that emotion resonates through the entire building. Creating music, let's say in isolation or amongst a small amount of people, is a different aspect, but still just as rewarding, because like I had said, you're kind of delving into yourself, you're finding things out about yourself that maybe you don't want to find out, but you have to in order to pull it out to make something great, you know? So yeah, they're both amazing. It would be, let me ask you this. Yeah, I'm assuming you've asked that of different people. Is my answer similar, or is my answer like what have other people said?
It's pretty interesting. So most of the time it's pretty similar. I also had people who were like more enjoying the creative aspect, and were not really enjoying the performing live aspect, and even struggling with stage fears or something. So you can have everything primarily. Right.
You just can't let strangers, like no strangers allowed, you know, I guess at the shows. It has to be everyone that you know. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So no, I can see that. I myself, you know, to that point of anyone who's talked about stage fright and stuff like that, I think that when I perform, it almost feels a little bit like, in moments, there's moments where I go and, you know, give high fives or whatever to like people in the front row and you interact a little bit. But there's other moments during a live performance where I'm so into the zone of that music that I'm performing that it almost feels like I'm in this alternate alone place. Like I wouldn't say completely alone, but I'm definitely in some other place that no one else is at. So I think maybe that's a way that maybe you can combat any sort of anxiety is just if you get into a place where you feel like it's just you with that song, that you are less worried about who's watching you, I guess, you know.
Hmm?
But this day and age, so many people are riddled with these problems and anxiety. It's a shame, you know. So I feel for them.
Very true.
Yeah.
So when thinking about you being on stage, and also like how you're now sitting there, right?
Yeah.
Is this you? Are you considering this more artificial or more you?
Like right now,
Yeah.
versus performing on stage being the more genuine me.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I would say about that. Sort of like this, and I'll miss your analogy, right? The same way that I try to use things that people could relate to,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that if you can relate to something I'm saying, then you can understand the way it is for how I feel. So the same way that an individual might be a father to some, a son to another, a brother to one, a boss to someone, an employee to someone, um, a role model to someone, or let's say someone who looks up to someone else to another. You have these different roles in life. And so I think most people can very easily switch in between, oh, right, when I hang out with my brother, I kind of take on more the brotherly part of myself. And I would, or if I'm hanging out with a parent, I take on the sort of, I'm in the role of they're my parent or something. And I think that no one would ever say, oh, you're being such a fake when you hang out with your brother. Like, I see the way that you act. You don't act that way when you're around your partner, your romantic partner. It's like, well, because it's different aspects of life. So for me, when I'm at home, I'm just kind of doing my thing at home. And then when I'm on stage, I'm the me that would come out on stage. And so I'd say they're all genuine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, I'll put it to you this way, Dom. When I go to, let's say, like a gas station, I don't think anyone there wants the me that's on stage. Right?
That might be true.
Yeah. I wouldn't if I were working there. So I'll just put it like that. So it's all genuine. There's no, well, one's the real me and one's not the real me. I'd say it's more what avenue is those are those aspects coming out. So on stage, it's definitely turned way up to 11 on certain attributes that are within me that are always there. Then at home, it's other attributes that are turned up. Maybe I'm more in tune with creativity. And when you're out on the road, you're not really creating as much as you are reciting and performing. You know what I mean? So.
True. So actually, what about your tour plans? Is anything planned? I frankly spoken, I didn't find anything. I think I was typing my fingers wound.
Yeah. Yeah.
The short answer, yeah.
Well, so my desire, personally, my desire would be that Ludovico Technique goes back out on the road this fall, like this autumn. I don't know, in different countries if they call it fall. So it would be autumn of 2023. That would be my desire in my heart. I've yet to talk to remember earlier I was talking about sometimes it becomes quite a large team of people. I've yet to discuss it with that team of people, because once you do, once you say, hey, I want to do this, it pretty much is the start button to you not really discussing anything else at that point. Then it's pretty much like every day is discussing this at length. So I think that as the spring, so what are we in? Today's April 1st, right? Yeah. Well, I don't know when you're going to release this. Maybe I should say we're currently in April.
That's
right?
all fine.
Right. So we're currently in April. I'd say that by May, I will kind of see how I'm feeling as far as like, yeah, let's do this. Let's do some fall touring, get back out on the road, see what that's all about. I mean, I don't know how it is where you are. Right here, the economy, Dom, it's not stellar. So, that's there's a lot of contributing factors that's kind of going into bands touring at the very moment. And we'll have to see what goes on for the future. But yeah, I had taken a year or two off of touring, and then the thing happened. And then that took another two, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I wasn't planning for those. So for 2020 and 2021 and 2023, I wasn't planning on those being years off. It ended up being that way. So I am ready to get back out there. I think that I'm ready to come to Europe. I'm ready to come to Germany. I am excited to come. I think that there's a lot to experience. I think Ludovico Technique is ready to be there. So
it's really good to hear.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I want to come there, and all of Europe, and obviously Germany as well. So we'll see. And if let's say I play some United States shows in the fall or something like that, at the very least I could start looking into the spring. I know that's festival season there, and so I'll take a look at that. But if ever there was a time that the wheels are now starting to move again for live things for Ludovico Technique, it is definitely more now. Because if you had asked me the same question in 2019, I would have said I'm totally not interested in touring at the very moment. It's been enough time now that I'm definitely like, let's go back out. Another thing is, well, I don't know if you were going to ask me this, but I'll just say it. And then if you want to cut this part out and then ask the question, and then I'll answer. I'm going to release another album again this year. So, yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So real quick, there's not going to be another 5-year, so that period of my life is kind of finished. That's completed. So I released the album in 2022, Haunted People. My goal is to release another album by the end of 2023. And if for some reason I fall short of 2023, it would definitely be the first quarter of 2024 then. But I'll be doing the same thing where I'll be releasing the singles. So it's April now. I'll probably have the first single from this next album out by June or July.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm already gonna go. Yeah, so then we're gonna go June, July, August, September. We're gonna go the whole month thing again. So people love that. I love it. It's exciting. Yeah. So there is a lot more Ludovico Technique material coming out this year. I had to most of the year thus far. I know it's already April, but most of the year thus far has been finishing up the Live As Myself editing. That's one aspect I didn't touch on. Doing camera work, it's very rewarding. Editing, it's not the rewarding part, I'll tell you that. So yeah, that's the least rewarding.
I know.
I think. Yeah, you edit, so it's the filming. Oh, it's amazing. Editing. It feels a little bit like having to clean up after you have a party. It's not the fun part. So the party is the filming. Everyone's having a great time. You're getting all the good. The next morning when there's a bunch of trash everywhere, that's the editing. And so that's what I've had to be doing lately. So.
Yeah, that's also a lovely analogy.
There you go.
So, but now when you're releasing new albums, I mean, you haven't played Haunted People live until today, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, now let's forget for a moment. Of course, we're not forgetting. We're really excited, that new singles are coming out.
Yeah.
But let's forget them for the moment. Which song of Haunted People are you really looking forward to play live and to perform live?
Well,
I know it's all of them, but you have to choose.
I know. So far, it was a pretty good guess that I'd say that. I'll give you that. But so for different, so I do, just like you said, all of them. I do love all of them. But at the same time, what I was going to do, because we would definitely perform Potential, Deeper Into You, and Absence from prior to that album.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, so Potential, Deeper Into You, and Absence are pre-Haunted People. And those will be the ones that come regardless. So then I would definitely perform Embrace. I would definitely perform Becoming Numb. And of course, Live As Myself, which is about to have a music video in a couple days released. I definitely have that. With that said, because, okay, and hear me out. Okay, Dom, just listen. I think that because all of them are part of my, heart and soul, I wouldn't have a problem. I really would not have a problem with every time we go to a different market. So let's say we're playing the West Coast of the United States. If there's a leg, like a little run of like 7 dates or whatever, putting it out there and saying, hey, everyone, vote. Here's a list of all the songs. Give us your votes of what you all want to hear the most. If we play the East Coast, I can assure you it would be different songs. There'd be some overlap, but there'd be different songs. If we come to Germany, I think that Germany, I don't know what they'd want to hear. So when every song that you write, you're genuine and you pour your genuine emotion into, you really don't have a problem with picking different set lists for different markets because you don't feel like you're just pandering. You don't feel like it's fake. They're all your songs and they're all a part of you. And so if that market connects differently, I mean, worst case scenario, I could look at, like, let's say my streaming numbers for different countries and different cities and see which songs stream the most. Let's say if I didn't even ask a poll to people. So, but I'll tell you this, to give you an answer, because I know you want one, you want the actual just definitive answer. I am excited to play Haunted, so.
Okay.
And so I'm haunted, like the one that has some Mozart in it. Yeah, like I'm excited to perform that. I do love that song. It doesn't even have a music video. It only has a lyric video. I love that song.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I count on that. Okay. So when I mean, now it's some while back, right? But how does a tour day of Ben look like?
What's that? What is it?
A day on tour. 1 day on tour.
A day on tour.
Ben?
Man, I could spin a tale of glory and amazingness of just the sun shining in the most unique and beautiful of ways, and every city that you get to just sort of opening its arms to you, and they hand you the keys to the city, and then the venue, everyone that works there has a positive attitude, and everything goes well. So I'll tell you what, I'll just go with that. That's the way it is. That's the typical tour day. There it is. Yeah.
So that sounded pretty bloomy. Any anecdotes from tour?
No.
I will ask you something that you really still think about, and something that was like where you say, okay, almost the worst day ever.
Almost the worst day ever. Well, I mean, okay. So I can share some stuff. I mean, like some of these venues, like at least in America, I mean, we'd show up, and one of my band members, my guitarist / keyboard player, would have to somehow help wire the sound system when we got there because they had it all torn apart. A lot of fans don't know what goes on behind the scenes. Sometimes we'll show up to a venue and like they got the whole thing, the whole sound system, like down on the ground, torn apart, like things aren't even put together and working yet. They're like, so this one time it was in a state called Texas. I don't know if your viewers would be familiar with Texas, but we were in a city called Houston, Texas, which is right in the middle and at the bottom of the United States, near Mexico, near the Mexico border. And when we got into the venue, and it was a decently large venue, kind of the whole sound system was brought to the ground, and the employees were like rewiring it, and we're thinking, what's going on? Well, anyway, long story short, my keyboard / guitar player had to like help them because they didn't know what they were doing, and he happens to be pretty, tech savvy on that sort of thing, like audio engineering, wiring, and routing cables for audio and stuff like that. So, and he's looking at me like, I don't really want to be doing this, but if I don't, there's not going to be a show. Like, basically, I'm stuck in a hard. I would rather go just relax and maybe get a nap in because we've been on the road driving. Like, and I'm looking at him like, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, I guess I'll help them because if I don't, we're not playing because there will be no sound system. So it's stuff like that, stuff. Those are like the worst days on tour because, let's be honest, most people, when they hear artists talk about like, oh, touring is so rough, they're like, oh, yeah, poor famous musician that everyone loves and adores. It's so tough, isn't it? Right? Like, no, I would say that the worst days are the days that you're going to have a rough time expressing your art to the fans that have paid so much and come so far to come see your show. That's like my worst days on tour is when there's something that gets in the way of the show being all it can be. And so that's why that's my worst day, is like the sound not working, or I don't know, something to do with that. Because anything else, the tiredness, the grueling schedule, you do it because you love it. And yeah, for those couple weeks or couple months that you're doing it, it's going to be like that. But that's not forever, so you could deal with it.
That's true. Okay, now let's switch to the positive side. The three locations / places, towns, whatsoever you played, still springing in your mind because it was so awesome, and the reason for that?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a question that I would like to say, it's difficult because when you're on tour, it's not just like, oh, wow, like this city was great because the city's great and everything. Like, sure, there's like your New Yorks and your Chicagos and your LAs and these big cities that are like the turnouts are enormous and people's energy is great. But then really, there's these places like, well, you'll just play like somewhere in like Idaho, and like the people that come there are so. There was this one time we played, and this isn't my vote for like 3 best cities, but I think we played Arkansas, like these states that maybe people from Europe, they're like, Arkansas, what's that? Like even some people in America are like, Arkansas, what's that? Like, so there's places that we've played where the people came from so far around because there's nothing like that in where they're from. And they always are so grateful that you've come, that it's hard for me to go, oh yeah, New York was best because it was a bunch of people that came, or the venue was the nicest, they had the best sound system, and my keyboard player didn't have to help, like put it together. That's the best then. So it's like, I don't want to say that anyone's the best. I think that the moments in time, which there are many, there's far more than 3, that are the best, is when you make those connections with people who are really moved by what you do. And because we all try to strive to find our purpose of why we're even here, right? Like different people do it in different ways. Religious people find religion, and other people find other things that make it to why we're here. And I think that when you have those connections, when you make those connections with people, it transcends what city you're in. It transcends if there was only 150 people there versus 400 people there versus 1,000 people there. I don't know what the right criteria would be to say these are the top 3 cities, because every city has people who, even if it's a small little town where there's barely anything like what we do that ever comes there, that's this memory that I'll always have. Versus even like when we play New York City and it's 1,000 people or whatever, and everyone loves it. So What are some of my personal favorite places to be? Well, I grew up on the East Coast of the United States. So whenever we go and it's out the West where there's like mountains and kind of deserts, like I love that stuff. I love it because I wasn't used to that. So for me personally, but that's more like there's a different aspect when you're on tour. There's like almost like the I'm on vacation aspect of it, which you're just seeing mountains and you're seeing like locations and kind of things that you don't normally see when you're back at home. But that might not have much to do with the performances of a show that you're playing the next day. You know what I mean? So there's my top three places to visit that just if I was just driving across wherever. But yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Not quite the answer you wanted, but
the thing is, not all questions need to be answered easily, right? So that's what we
I proved that here today, Don.
All right. So how did you get into the Gothic scene?
I think that when I was younger, I always I don't know how many people are going to be able to relate to this. I always kind of rooted for the bad guys of everything. So, when you're watching Star Wars and it's like Darth Vader is the coolest or whatever, right? Like, so like anytime there was some sort of story, I always thought like the Joker was cooler than Batman. I always thought that like the villain was always
but he is, right?
Right. I always thought it was like more interesting.
That's not the question. I mean,
yeah. So I think pre my Goth years, that was sort of the primer of, later on as a teenager, I would get into Goth stuff, but I think you need to be able to see the world in that way. You need to like some darkness so let's say that's a preface. So that's prefacing that even as a young person prior to becoming like a Goth or going into that subculture, I always had a desire, like a more, I would connect more with the kind of the villains of stories because I feel like they're more dimensional, so villains typically are written very dimensional and the hero is sort of like one dimensional, like I stand for good, period, that's it. It's kind of one note, that's it. And then the more complex and like sort of deep aspects are explored through the villain. So that's probably why. So getting into Goth subculture, I think that we all sort of look for when you're growing up and you're like a teenager and you're trying to find your voice and like what you connect with and who you are, like what your identity is. And for some people in school, like they maybe get into sports, whatever. So here in America, a lot of young people, they'll go into sports and that'll be their identity. I'm a baseball player, American football and baseball. And that becomes kind of like their entire identity for many years of their life up until many years later. That's really what they're involved in. And I think for those of us who that didn't really have much of an interest for, you sort of just kind of float along. And then I remember someone this is kind of the typical story. It's always someone's older sister brings in the Nine Inch Nails tape or something, or like CD. And then that's like the gateway, like something along those lines. This is probably a story told as old as time by thousands of people. So you hear some downward spiral or something like that, and really you're transformed. You think, I've never heard anything like this or whatever. And then very quickly you're listening to like Bauhaus and Front 242. See, this is the American version, so maybe the European version is a little different. There might be a little bit more Front 242, in there, stuff like that. But the American version is like Skinny Puppy. Not, I know they're Canadian, but so then you get the Nine Inch Nails, Skinny Puppy, Ministry, stuff like that. And you think, man, this is this is really edgy and badass. And then you start to feel like you really belong. You're like, this embodies how I feel. Like this music is really something that speaks not only to me, but sort of in a way for me. Like if someone comes and presents themselves to me, I can like play this and turn it up, and it's sort of like letting them know, beware or enter at your own risk or something, you know. And I think that music is a powerful element to everyone's existence, and that's why I myself am so grateful to be able to do what it is I do, because I know how much music has meant to me throughout my life. So yeah, there's that.
Okay, so yeah, but I mean, I think that's for many people, like, you know, exactly this path into the scene. So and in general, so I mean, you told a lot about that, so this will then probably be a easier question. So what nowadays does the Gothic scene mean for you, and maybe also reflecting a little bit what's changed?
Well, I think that much like when you grow up in a certain environment, like goth industrial music is in my veins. It's where I come from. It's my heritage. It's my kind of culture. Now, with that said, as far as the future or what's changed, I think that for Ludovico Technique, at least, I realized quite a few years ago that so I might have a working knowledge of, you know, Neubauten and Throbbing Gristle and like some scroll that would like roll across the ground, like that, this gatekeeper stuff of all these bands that you have to know or else you're not goth and all these things. Yeah, sure, I know them, but at the same time, I realized that not everyone else has to know that. Like, so as weird as this might sound, I got to a point where I thought, you know, not everyone that listens to Ludovico Technique, not every new fan that comes along has to have this, you know, elitist knowledge of the entirety of the history of goth or industrial music in order for me to still welcome them in as a fan. And I think when that happened and I realized that anyone who loves music is welcome, it did open up a lot of opportunities. So as you had mentioned at the beginning of this interview, you know, we're covered by Knotfest, we're covered by Alternative Press, we're covered by Metal Injection. And I think that that was a direct result of me understanding that you can't, if you have something in your heart to express, you can't shun a certain community from listening to what you do because you're only limiting yourself. So it doesn't, and you know, people might disagree with me. They might say, no, I only want people who know who Throbbing Gristle are to listen to my band. Well, that's fine. That's for them. I only want people who know who this is, VMD Nation, whoever it might be, to listen to my band. If they don't know this, they're not allowed to listen to me. You know, I don't think that's probably the most productive way. Another thing is about the goth community, it appeals to people who typically are maybe a little bit more intellectual. So it means that they are maybe a little bit more opinionated. And honestly, it could lead to those opinions not always being one that is open to want to listen to new things. So the same things that are the industrial or gothic community's strengths, which are very well-read individuals who educate themselves on a lot of things and are very opinionated, can also work against you if you have a band or a project that they're not familiar with. Mm-hmm. They might be a little more hesitant to like new things because they have all the boxes checked of things they like. I like The Cure and I like this and I got Depeche Mode and this, and I'm not looking for anyone new. I got all the stuff I love and there's no more room for Ludovico Technique. So what's one to do? If you try to make a career out of what you do, it means that you have to kind of think outside of those limitations, and you have to allow yourself to be liked by anyone who likes music. And that's that. Now, with that said, it means that you should still stay true to yourself. So there's not a song on Haunted People that I wrote that's not 100% genuinely me. Let's say there's some old school Ludovico Technique fans that would say like, oh, you change your sound and I like the old stuff. It's like, well, aren't you glad that I recorded it? Because then you could listen to it for the end of time. So yeah, I liked it too. That's why I wrote it. So if so, I'll get these messages every once in a while, like, I like this song best. And I'm like, I'll tell you what, I wrote that one. I like it too. Thank you. Like
That's so true.
So I like the way you used to do a thing. It's like, I wrote it. I liked it too, but I think for me, I couldn't just continue. I can't just write deeper into you over and over and over again, or else it wouldn't fulfill me inside, So I think that as long as you stay true to what you really feel inside when you're writing music, whoever it is that it's marketed to is really inconsequential as long as the music itself was genuine. So if I write a song that I wrote and it's like the most underground sounding, like most old school Ludovico Technique sounding, but then they plaster it, they take that song after I'm completed it, after I'm done it, finished, and you take it and you blast it to everywhere possible, like all over billboards and all that. It's not going to change the song. Even if more people know about it, it's not going to change what the song means and the emotional expression, presented in the song. So I think it's more important that the music itself is untouched by the concern of others. Like you had said a little while ago, you have to kind of be like your own biggest fan and write music that you want to hear. And, for those moments, don't worry about anyone else and what anyone else likes. Like, I've seen other artists, and this is kind of me going on a little tangent as usual right now. I've seen other artists, where a few minutes ago I said, hey, we might put up for a vote, like which songs we would play on a tour. I would only ever have people vote on things of that nature, where it's like, what songs do you want to hear that we've already written? And like, that's fine with me. I've seen people put up votes on like, what do you want us to write songs about and stuff like that. That's a step further than I'm at least personally willing to go, because when I'm writing music, I think the reason that people connect so much with it, if it's their thing, is because I wrote it from a place of inner reflection versus worrying about what anyone else would like. Music that's written to try to be appealing hardly ever is, compared to the genuine emotional expression of music that's written for the artist's like journey of reflection within themselves. Those are the songs that really are the most powerful, that I think people connect with the most. So you could try to write for other people. I don't think it ever works out quite as well as the ones that are genuine.
True. Very true.
Yeah.
As long as it comes from the heart, then this is the only way people can connect then in the end with it, right? So, and either you can connect or you can't. It's just...
Yeah. And so my opinion about that is, once you write a genuine work like that, promote it to anybody. Like, promote it anywhere, to whatever markets are available, because as long as the art in itself is genuine, it can be seen by as many people as possible. So that's one thing I think about. Your question originally was about the Goth industrial community scene. What have I seen change? I think that's one thing that maybe I have that's one part of me that has changed from the way I used to view things when viewing it from that community. Because we all know that there is some element in the industrial or Goth community that thinks that if you get that kind of exposure, that's uncool or something like that. Of course, I remember. I mean, we're doing an interview, so I'll give you a little bit of interview stuff. I remember when we did get into the alternative press, and I was very excited, because that's like, this is a magazine that here in America people grow up like knowing and reading. And I said to some of my friends from the goth community, people that I knew personally, I was like, hey, we just got into alternative press, and they were like, kind of turned their nose up at it. And I think it was at that moment that I realized, you know what, I'm doing what's right in my heart, even if some of the people that are a little bit more elitist are like, they don't think that that's something to strive for, to get your music shown to more people or by it. That's just something that we'll have to disagree on. Anyone who has their opinion, that's fine. I'm not trying to say that they're wrong, but I definitely know what's right for me and what's right for when I express myself through these works, through these songs. I know I have to put it out there in the world, the best that I can.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, it's always a thing, like when you get to a certain reach, and the audience grows and whatsoever. I mean, then there are people coming, hey, now it's getting mainstream whatsoever. But in the end, yeah, you're making money with it, right?
Yeah, and here's what I would, and yes, and here's what I would say, just to kind of reiterate one last time, as long as the music itself is heartfelt, then It really doesn't matter how many other people either A, like it, or B, know about it, or, I remember a long time ago in the industrial scene, for me, the goth scene, I would find a thing, and if no one else knew about it, I felt like it was my own private little gem that somehow I had found. And the moment anyone else knew about it, it's like I maybe didn't like it as much. This was very early on. I've grown beyond that, but you know what I mean. So yeah.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So next thing is, it's always like in my interviews, one of the last parts, actually, it's speed questions.
Oh,
are you up for that?
Let's go. Let's do it. Speed questions.
Exactly. So in the end, the idea is that you give a quick answer. Of course, you can also elaborate on that whatsoever.
No, I'll keep this one quick.
That's up to you.
I'll play along with the idea of speed, and we'll just go.
Okay. So, what's your favorite food?
Oh, we're doing human stuff, like personal human stuff. Okay.
As well.
Okay, I was gearing up for speed questions, but if it's going to be what's my favorite food kind of questions, oh man, pass. Well, let's keep going.
Favorite drink?
I don't think, you know what? Pass. I don't think.
Okay. So, what's your 3 favorite Ludovico Technique songs if you would have to choose?
Okay. Heal My Scars from Some Things Beyond Therapy, Haunted from Haunted People, and probably Absence. I know a lot of people like that as well. I do as well. But that's only if I had to choose. So
I know. It's all your babies, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, which one of your fingers is your favorite finger? Do you want to do away with one of them?
Well,
yeah. So, all right, speed questioning. Let's go.
Okay. So, not looking at Ludovico Technique, what are your all-time 3 favorite songs?
Oh, in life? Mm-hmm. Like, out of any artist? Oh. I mean, there would have been, if you had asked me this at a certain time in my life, it would have been like 3 Skinny Puppy songs, right? And so now, like, I know that these are very simple questions. It's like, I feel like the more difficult questions I have like answers for, and the more simple questions, like, what's your favorite food? I'm like, today or last week? I mean, so what am I free? Lately it's like but if I were to tell you what I've been getting into.
Fine.
What's that? Skinny Puppy's
fine. And lately is fine. So what
lately?
What are the 3 songs that you're listening up and down at the moment, apart from your songs?
No, I don't know, man. I can't even tell you. Like, I listen to. What's interesting is I listen to so much different types of music. I mean, I listen to goth industrial music, of course. It's where I come from. It's my heritage, right? But then I also listen to alternative music. I also listen to like old, like classic stuff. I listen to classic old music. So I don't know. Path. See, look, I'm trying. At least I'm trying. Right? I'm trying.
All good. Okay. Well, what's your greatest fear?
Greatest fear, Dom.
It's a famous question.
Today? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, oh, my greatest fear today while talking to Dom, doing 20 questions with Dom. That's my greatest fear right now.
It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. So
there's two left? Or
no, one is left.
There's one left. Or what's the last one? Let's do that.
Okay. So, I mean, you gave a hint already before. So I'm also like, the older guy. So I prefer to listen to albums than playlists, even though I have a lot of playlists now. And this question would be, what is your preference? How are you listening to music?
I come from an era of albums. So there's a part of my life that I would say, you put on Pink Floyd's The Wall, or, like you put on Downward Spiral from Nine Inch Nails, or you put on an album, Geography from 242, whatever it might be, and like you just listen to it, and it's a whole experience. And yes, I do come from that era. Like that's how I grew up. That's how I like things. I'll say that today, I listen to playlists I make. I mean, I hate to say it, but even I myself have kind of seen the value of, if I'm going to work out, I might have a playlist for that. I don't want to put on Pink Floyd's The Wall and listen to the whole thing while I'm trying to do certain, So I think that it depends on what your lifestyle might be. Like if you have time to just kind of relax and chill out, then it's album time. Mm-hmm. For the hustle and bustle of the modern 2023 existence, maybe playlists and just little compilations that you make for yourself. I mean, well, see, here's what's interesting. I know this is supposed to be 20 questions, real quick, rapid. Since this is the last one, I'll expand a little bit on this. Back in the 1950s and 60s, before there even were albums, like artists used to go just record one song, and it might have a B-side. So let's say like Elvis Presley in the United States or something, like he would just release like a 45, like the little records, and it would just be that song. So when they would say to each other like, hey, let's go cut a hit record, they were talking about one song. So there wasn't this idea of albums quite yet. That didn't really come into like the mid 60s. And like where you recorded an entire session of songs that would go onto like, that there would be like 8 to 12 songs that were like there. So I think that maybe, and just hear me out, Donna, I think that maybe this era that we're currently in of singles and playlists and compilations that you make for yourself, I think maybe that harkens a little bit more back to that time period where people were just taking music in 45 record by 45 record, the little ones. I'd like to think of it like that. I'm sure someone else would be like, nah, it's not like that at all. But I like to think of it like it's just a way to experience things a little differently. But as we all know, the time ever progresses, and I'm sure at some point in another few years, people will long for more long format, content like albums and stuff like that. I'm sure they'll make a comeback at some point. I'm sure of it.
Ben, again, it was such a pleasure talking to you. So it was just an awesome. I'm not sure if it was an interview or it was like, a discussion, a chat or whatsoever.
Sure.
So it was just fun.
Right.
So I would really look forward to, do that again, maybe, shortly before when you're going on tour again.
Yeah.
I'm so looking forward to see you hopefully then, beginning next year or something in Germany.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Well, cool. I'm glad. I'm super excited to have spent the time, and I think it's a great time. So I'll talk to you again soon, and we'll hopefully make it to Germany as soon as possible. And what you said, Munich, right?
Exactly.
I'll remember. I'll be sure that we book Munich if we come.
Perfect. Sounds good. Right.
Well, I thank you so much, Dom, and you have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
All right, see ya.